We all trust the medicine we take, right? Especially something as important as a life-saving vaccine. But what if the biggest risk wasn't the active ingredient, but the one thing we never, ever think about? The part that makes up almost the entire dose. Let's take a look.
So, I've got a question for you. When you think about a vaccine, or really any medicine that's injected, what do you figure is the most important ingredient, just by sheer volume? What's most of it made of? Go ahead, take a guess.
It's not some super complex biological agent, and it's not a fancy stabilizing compound. Nope, the answer is something we see and use every single day, but in a form so pure it's almost impossible to imagine. In fact, get this one single ingredient makes up over 90% of the final product that actually goes into that vial. Its purity isn't just a nice-to-have, it is everything.
It's water. Yep. But in the pharmaceutical world, they have a special name for it. Water for injection, or WFI. It has to be one of the purest substances on planet Earth. And for decades, the industry has relied on a source for it that, well, it's becoming a huge problem.
So this ultra-pure water isn't just another item on the recipe list. It is the absolute bedrock of patient safety. And believe me, getting water to that level of purity is a constant, relentless battle against chemistry and biology.
For years and years, the source for this critical water has been right under our feet. But that resource we always thought was so reliable, our groundwater, it's just not pristine anymore. It's actually becoming a serious and growing risk.
This really breaks down the crisis perfectly. I mean, on the one hand, as we pump more and more water out of our aquifers, we're concentrating nasty stuff that's already there, like arsenic. And on the other hand, we're polluting it with everything you can imagine: pesticides, industrial forever chemicals, and even the drugs we flush down the toilet. Our groundwater is turning into a chemical cocktail.
But it's not just the chemicals that are the problem. There's a biological danger that is so much more insidious. And that brings us to the real villain of this story, something called an endotoxin.
Okay, first let's zoom out a little. We need to understand a bigger category of threat, a pyrogen. Put simply, a pyrogen is anything that, if you inject it into your body, will kick your immune system into overdrive and cause a fever.
And a bacterial endotoxin is a very specific and very nasty kind of pyrogen. The best way to think about them is like this. They're the toxic ghosts of dead bacteria. See, they're not alive. They're just little pieces of the cell wall from bacteria like E. coli, which just love to grow in groundwater. And that distinction between living and dead, that is absolutely critical.
This right here is what makes endotoxins an engineer's absolute nightmare. Living bacteria, you can kill them with heat or chlorine, and you can filter them out. But endotoxins are a whole different beast. They're super tough, they're heat stable, so boiling doesn't destroy them, and they are so incredibly tiny they can slip right through the very filters that are designed to catch live bacteria.
The stakes here are just astronomical. A single batch of a vaccine that fails an endotoxin test, it's immediately thrown out. The financial loss is in the millions for sure, but the damage to public trust and the risk to the supply chain, you can't even put a price on that.
So check this out. Here is the great paradox. To start cleaning the groundwater, the very first step is often to add a disinfectant, like chlorine, to kill off all the living bacteria. But what happens when you do that? You cause millions of these bacteria cells to burst open all at once, releasing a huge concentrated flood of endotoxins into the very water you're trying to clean. You've just made your own problem 10 times worse.
So, how does the industry deal with this problem that it basically just created for itself? Well, with brute force. And that brute force approach comes with some staggering costs, not just in money, but for the environment too. To get rid of the endotoxins they just released, they have to do some pretty extreme things. They literally have to boil the water into steam through distillation, which, as you can imagine, uses enormous amounts of energy. They're on a constant chemical treadmill, always adding acids and other agents. And their super expensive filters get clogged up all the time, which means downtime and costly replacements.
And just look at how inefficient this whole process is. For every 100 gallons of groundwater they pump in, up to 40 gallons get thrown away as this toxic sludge called reject water. This waste stream has all the concentrated gunk they just work so hard to remove, and then they have to pay even more to get rid of it. It's crazy. Okay, so if the ground is the source of the problem, what's the alternative? What if, instead of starting with contaminated water and fighting to clean it, you could just start with water that's already pure? Well, this brings us to a huge shift in thinking, getting our water from the air itself. It's a technology called atmospheric water generation, or AWG, and honestly, the process is beautifully simple. It's basically a highly advanced dehumidifier.
It pulls in regular air, filters it, and then condenses the water vapor into a liquid. The water it makes is incredibly pure, right from the very start.
And this table just says it all, doesn't it? Water from the atmosphere starts out with almost no minerals, no pesticides, and way fewer of the bacteria that create endotoxins in the first place. The input water is stable and predictable, and get this, it creates zero toxic wastewater. It completely sidesteps the main risks.
Now, to be perfectly clear, AWG doesn't replace the final, super strict purification process. That's not what it does. What it does do is provide the absolute perfect starting material. By feeding the system with ultra-clean water from the air, you make the entire process safer, more efficient, and way less wasteful.
You know, the Earth's atmosphere holds a truly staggering amount of fresh water, constantly being refilled by nature's own distillation cycle. So as our groundwater gets more and more stressed and polluted, the question isn't just, can we look to the sky for an answer, but maybe, just maybe, shouldn't we?